Welcome to the Virginia Wetland Condition Assessment Tool, or WetCAT. In this segment, we're going to learn how to add various layers and how to use some of the geoprocessing tools. In an earlier tutorial, we learned how to assess a particular wetland, and in this case, we'll go ahead and zoom in to a wetland. Continue to zoom down, and then we'll open up the layers, and let's choose again the National Wetland Inventory stress condition, and we'll look here and choose the Habitat and Water Quality Conditional Assessment. And this opening legend tells you the classifications for each. And if we continue just to simply zoom in, we can pick a particular spot by continuing to zoom, and say we can pan over here. We'll look at this particular wetland here and go over here and add the layer. Move down here and we'll add a layer of soils, the soil layer here. So that would be under our other layers category. Click on that and then click on the eye for soils. And we can open up the legend, and this shows you the hydric soils associated with that particular wetland and the surrounding landscape. We close that out. We can go ahead and move up here and open up the water quality layer. And we can turn on the Impaired Waters segment here. And over here we open the legend, and we'll zoom out here first, and over here looks like an area where we do have impaired water. So let's open the legend, and yep, so not supporting. So let's zoom in on that particular wetland. So we'll pan it over. So look at some additional layers here. So in this particular wetland, we can also look at if there's any permits that have been issued in the vicinity, and so we can turn on the permits and boundaries section. Go down here and turn on the Virginia wetlands permits, and we'll click on general permits, and we do have a couple permits that have been issued in this area. If you click on that dot, you get an idea of what that permit was, the permit number. And if you go over here, we can click on that one that's in the wetland. We get that permit number, but you can also shift over to, and it highlights it as well, the wetland itself, and get information on the wetland again of its habitat and water quality stress condition over the time series, and again how those scores relate to the overall scores for the 10-digit HUC, and how those scores have changed over the last time series. So that will allow us to do that. We click off that, and then what we can also look at is information associated with impaired waters. So we can click directly on the impaired waters segment, and it brings up information regarding the impaired waters, and you can scroll down and get a bunch of information, including what the impairment actually is, in this case E. coli and NPH, and it'll also tell you possible sources. We can also look at permits within a wider range here. So let's close out this box and then zoom out, and you begin to see where the general permits begin to populate the screen. But we can also go over and turn on individual permits, or go up here and bring up the core permits. And then we can zoom in and click on a particular one. We click on that, it shows us, well, the wetland associated with that permit. But if we go click here, we can look at the actual core permit and give us information on the type of permit and the amount of impacts and again, gives us more information on that particular permit. Next, let's look at using some of the geoprocessing tools. So let's close this out and close this out. And then we go up. We'll zoom in a little bit. Zoom in and let's go back to this particular wetland we were working with here that had the impaired waters associated with it. Click on that to identify it. Then we can close that out again if we'd like. And we'll move up here to the tools bar and pull out the geoprocessing tools. The first one we'll look at is the cumulative results. The cumulative results looks at activities within a 1 kilometer buffer around the particular spot on the map, in this case that wetland. So if we begin working on that, it'll generate that buffer. It'll take a few seconds to do that. Okay, once we have that, it'll pop up a information table, in which case it summarizes the scores within that 1 kilometer buffer. It looks at the stress levels of wetlands there. It tells you the types of wetlands associated with it, a breakdown of those within that buffer, any permits that are within that buffer. It also gives you a lot of soils information. It breaks down the soils, or percentage of the soil types within that buffer, and summarizes them, the most common types, and gives you the soil orders as well as the drainage classifications. And you can continue to get a fair amount of information on that, and goes through the rest of the information tables, including any impaired waters that are intersected by that buffer. So then you can, of course, print all this information out as well, or just parts of it, depending on what you want to retain. So now let's look at doing a different geoprocessing tool. So we'll close this out and we'll look at using the downstream path tool. And the downstream path creates a downstream flow path within a 2 kilometer buffer around the location. It reports the distances to the nearest intersected impaired water and provides additional information associated with that. And so we can move through here and click that, put that process in order. It'll take a number of seconds to process. So now we've moved this out from the 1 kilometer buffer with the cumulative analysis to the 2 kilometer buffer. And you can see here is the flow path, downstream flow path, which did intersect impaired waters. And so you can then look at the table and you can see the information associated with that impairment. And of course, you can print the results if you'd like. So let's go ahead and move through that, close out this particular table, and then go to the contributing watershed tool, processing tool. And so this actually allows you to look at looking at elevation data, the drainage area that contributes to the wetland that's been chosen. And so we're going to go ahead and start that job executing, and then again it'll take a few seconds to process. And there you have it. Let's move this over, pan over a little bit, and you can see that it's delineated a drainage area to that particular wetland, and given you a breakdown of the scores associated with it and the percent land use within the 200 meter buffer, but also percent land use within the drainage area out to 200 meter buffer. And you can see that a fair amount of that is pasture land here. Yeah. And so that provides you with some information associated with that particular wetland. And of course, you can also print this and other information that you might want. So in this segment, we learned about adding different layers and some of the geoprocessing tools, such as the Cumulative Results tool, the Downstream Path tool, and the Contributing Watershed tool.